Man shoots robber in home invasion. Was it a good shoot? Let's talk about it. Hello, my name is attorney Rachel Moss, and today we're going to do a legal analysis about a shooting that happened in Dearborn Heights, Michigan. Today we're going to be watching a clip where we see a robber breaking into a home and then a young man preparing to defend himself and his girlfriend. I say we just start out today by diving into the video. So here we see the robber coming into the house, starting to look around. And then he starts to head towards the bedroom area. Now we see the robber making his way out of the front door, clearly shot, limping away. So I know that video is a little hard to watch, and it moves pretty quickly, but what happens and what we've learned after Benjamin Nevers was interviewed by officers as well as the media is that Benjamin, the homeowner, heard the robbers coming into the house. He was getting ready in his room and he decided to wait in his room with his gun at the low ready. When the robber broke in, he alleged that the robber shot him in the foot first, and he immediately responded with his own gunfire, shooting the robber multiple times. As you can see, he ended up hitting the robber, and the robber crawled out of the house injured. What you may not have seen as well is that Benjamin's girlfriend was lying in the background. She was asleep, and she was also hit by a bullet. The bullet hit her in the back and actually traveled through her kidney and is now believed to be lodged in her chest. She had to spend a lot of time in the hospital, and she was ultimately released from the hospital. So clearly a very sad incident that happened. But today we're going to ask that question that we usually ask: was it a good shoot? I think this is one of those cases where from the top we can say this is an easy yes. If we're looking at Benjamin, he had a good shoot here. But let's talk about why. In Michigan, they have something called the Self-Defense Act, and it's pretty similar to other self-defense laws that we've talked about on this channel, but I'll go through it, break it down piece by piece. So under the Michigan Self-Defense Act, it says, an individual who has not or is not engaged in the commission of a crime at the time he or she uses deadly force may use deadly force against another individual anywhere he or she has the legal right to be, with no duty to retreat if either of the following applies. Then they put two different ways that someone could be justified in using deadly physical force. But to break down that first portion of the Self-Defense Act, first it points out that the individual using self-defense may not be involved in the commission of the crime. So here, for example, we have the robber. He would not be entitled here to use self-defense because he was involved in the commission of the crime. He was involved in a burglary at the time, breaking and entering into the house with the intent to commit a theft inside of that home. So here, the robber would not be justified in using self-defense, even if Benjamin had been the one to shoot him first, because he was involved in a commission of a crime. Then the next part of the statute says that the individual has the right to use deadly force with no duty to retreat. That's important, specifying that Michigan is one of those very wonderful stand your ground states. That means even if Benjamin had a clearly safe way to escape during this incident, he did not have to. He had the right to stand his ground and defend himself. So even though he heard the robber coming, even though he might have had time to safely make his way out of his room to another room, he didn't have to. He had the ability to stand his ground because right in Michigan law, they write in the fact that there is no duty to retreat in their state. So now we need to talk about the two circumstances where this right to self-defense, this right to use deadly physical force, in Michigan applies. So Section A says it applies if the individual honestly and reasonably believes that the use of deadly force is necessary to prevent the imminent death of or imminent great bodily harm to himself or herself or to another individual. So here, this part accounts for the mistake of fact. It's saying we're basing this law off of the fact that the individual honestly and reasonably believes. So it's based on that individual's perception. If he has that honest belief that he's facing imminent death or great bodily harm, he can then use self-defense to defend himself. Here, I think it was pretty easy for Benjamin to see that he was facing deadly physical force. In fact, Benjamin was the first one shot. As Benjamin said, he was shot in the foot. His foot actually shattered as a result of that bullet, and he ended up needing a lot of surgery, including screws and plates being placed in his foot. So he was clearly easily facing the risk of death. The robber had a gun. Benjamin saw the gun. He was shot in the foot. Benjamin did not use deadly physical force until he was shot first. So he's clearly responding to that risk of imminent death or serious physical injury when he shot the robber back. The statute also specifies the right to act in defense of others. As it says, you can use deadly physical force to protect another individual. This is important here because Benjamin could also assert defense of others in defense of his girlfriend who was behind him in the bed. You could see her sleeping there under the covers. It looks like she was either sleeping or hiding in fear from the robber coming in. So she was under the covers, and Benjamin not only had the right to defend himself against the robber's deadly physical force, but he also had the right to defend his girlfriend against deadly physical force as well. So here we can see the Michigan Self-Defense Act clearly protects Benjamin's behavior. There's also another section that someone could assert, Section B, but Section B isn't applicable here. But it's worth pointing out that Michigan has a section specifically stating that individuals are able to use deadly physical force in order to protect themselves or someone else against sexual assault. So there is an additional protection for other sorts of crime prevention under the Michigan Self-Defense Act. Section 2 of the Michigan Self-Defense Act specifies that an individual who has not or is not engaged in the commission of a crime at the time he or she uses force other than deadly force may use force other than deadly force against another individual anywhere he or she has the legal right to be with no duty to retreat if he or she honestly and reasonably believes that the use of that force is necessary to defend himself or herself or another individual from the imminent unlawful use of force by another individual. Section 2 allows individuals in Michigan to also protect themselves from things less than deadly physical force. In this scenario, it was clearly obvious that Benjamin was facing deadly physical force, so this section didn't necessarily apply to him too, but again, worth pointing out that Michigan has that protection against ordinary physical force in the Self-Defense Act as well. So overall, it's just clear on the face of the Michigan Self-Defense Act that Benjamin acted in good self-defense. It was a good shoot. Here, as we stated, Benjamin was the party that was shot first. He was facing death or serious physical injury or great bodily harm here. However, even if Benjamin had not been the party who had been shot first, I believe Benjamin would have still been justified in exercising his deadly physical force here. That's because of castle doctrine. Castle doctrine is a doctrine that allows individuals to have extra protection when they're protecting themselves in their house. Basically, what castle doctrine does, it gives you the presumption that you're acting in self-defense here. So where normally in a self-defense incident, there may not be a presumption one way or the other if you acted in good self-defense or not. If castle doctrine applies, then there is a presumption that you acted in good self-defense. There is a presumption that you acted reasonably in your self-defense. However, presumptions can always be rebutted. That means you start with a presumption saying, okay, it's more likely that you acted in self-defense, but there are things that can overcome that presumption. I always give a pretty simple example to show times when a presumption can be rebutted. For example, if you hear someone breaking into your home and they walk through the door and you see it's a 5-year-old kid, that's a situation where that presumption of self-defense can be rebutted because it's pretty obvious to anyone that that 5-year-old kid is not going to be able to do much damage to you. Then there's times where that presumption, it's a little more tricky if it can be rebutted or not. For example, what if a neighbor broke into your house and it's a neighbor you know, but they were intoxicated, so maybe one could think that they just accidentally got confused about which house they were going to. But they were still breaking into your house and they were acting kind of erratic. That's a situation where, depending on your jury, they might find that presumption of reasonableness rebutted, but there might be times where they agree with you that that's a time that you're able to act in self-defense. However, there's times like this case where it's much more clear that that presumption's not going to be rebutted. Here we have a situation where someone was breaking into a home and it's very obvious that it's a robber, it's someone there not to do any good. In this case, we could see the robber was clearly wearing a ski mask. He looked like a classic movie-style burglar here. And that's a situation where if someone can see someone they clearly don't recognize, they're wearing a ski mask, it looks like they're in the house to do no good, you can see them carrying a gun, that's a situation where you know that individual's capable of inflicting deadly physical force against you. And even though you have that presumption of self-defense here, there's a very low chance that that presumption is going to be rebutted. Especially with castle doctrine here, this is a case where we can clearly say it is a good shoot. Another thing we can talk about is crime prevention. Many states have a crime prevention statute, like the state I practice in, Arizona. The crime prevention statute allows you to use deadly physical force to prevent certain types of crimes. In Arizona, burglary is one of those crimes that you can prevent using deadly physical force. So if he lived in Arizona, that would be another defense he would have available to him. Here, Benjamin doesn't really need that defense. He was clearly acting in self-defense, and he also could assert defense of others as well. But it's always good to have another defense out there to be able to use in your legal case. Another detail that's interesting but not actually relevant to the legal analysis is that one of Benjamin's friends was staying over that night. There were actually 2 robbers that broke in, and one of them was holding Benjamin's friend at gunpoint. The reason this isn't really relevant to the legal analysis is because Benjamin did not seem to be aware that the friend was being held at gunpoint. If Benjamin had known, that would have only given Benjamin a better case for self-defense, but he didn't really need that here to assert self-defense. Here, one of the burglars, Philip Price, ended up being caught. Philip Price is facing a 21-count indictment, including assault with intent to murder and armed robbery. So hopefully justice will be done in this case. Unfortunately, the other robber has not been caught as of the date of this recording. However, we're hoping this robber will be caught and brought to justice as well. There's also been a GoFundMe page set up to support Benjamin and his girlfriend. Overall, what we can say is Benjamin had a good shoot here. It's clear based on the Michigan Self-Defense Act, as well as Castle Doctrine, that Benjamin acted properly. Thank you for tuning in to another legal analysis. If you want to learn a little bit more about us, you can check us out at attorneysforfreedom.com. You can get to know our team, as well as learn a little bit about the types of cases we take. You can also check us out at attorneysonretainer.us. Attorneys on Retainer is a self-defense protection program, where if you find yourself in a self-defense incident and you are a member of the Attorneys on Retainer program, you will have your legal fees covered. So check us out again at attorneysonretainer.us. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Go ahead, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace.